I'll move on to my next presentation, What's Troubling the ART World, the New Regulations. Just a clarification here, I don't think what's troubling us are, in fact, the new law or the new regulations. What's troubling us is the rather hodgepodge way in which these have been put up. And I told you that the MTP Act, in fact, was one of the most elegant pieces of legislature which has come out of our parliament. It is an empowering act. It is a protective act because it protects us from the Indian Penal Code. It empowers women to get access to abortion. And the tone and the tenor of that act is very, very different from the act that I'm going to talk about now, which is the ART Act. And I will tell you why this is so. Assisted reproduction has always stood at the intersection of medicine, law, and ethics. Anybody who has read the story of Louise Brown when she was born so many years back will remember the storm of criticism that Steptoe and Edwards faced when Louisa Brown was born. Amongst other accusations, they were also accused of playing God. In fact, and I'm sure all of you know this, but I'll just reiterate that they selected Louisa Brown's mother as the index patient because she had block tubes. And they said that if we select any other indication, people will not believe that this pregnancy came from IVF. But because she had block tubes, people will understand that IVF was the only way she got pregnant. And that was also a consideration in selecting that patient. So as I said, the intersection of medicine, law, and ethics, you can see that signboard over there. And if you can't read the signs on that signboard, don't worry. A lot of people can't, including the activists and the lawyers who have actually written the ART Act. The fact remains that infertility and infertility treatment is a felt need. The desire to procreate is ingrained so strongly in humans. And I quite like the title of this WHO paper, Mother or Nothing, the Agony of Infertility. I'm sure all of you have had patients like this. I had this patient who was taking treatment with me. I did 2 cycles. She didn't conceive, not IVF. I just did basic oral ovulation induction. And she told me, doctor, you have to do IVF for me next time. So I said, but you don't need IVF. She said, no, doctor, you don't understand. Every time I get my period, my mother-in-law and my husband beat me. And I have to get pregnant in this month. I'm worried that otherwise I'll suffer from severe injury. I'm sure all of us have heard these stories about infertility. And I think the pain of infertility is sometimes minimized because infertility treatment, IVF treatment, to my mind is sometimes, particularly by all these government people and activists, etc., looked upon as a bit of an elite kind of a treatment. We talk so much about maternal mortality, morbidity, rightly so. But even infertility is a public health problem. Consider the fact that 8 to 10% of all couples in the reproductive age group will need treatment for infertility. Not IVF, but treatment for infertility. If something is affecting such a large chunk of population, how can we not see it as a public health problem? But unfortunately, we don't always. And that really needs to change. In fact, the discussions around this ART bill have been taking place for more than a decade. I was a part of this meeting. It was at that time led by ICMR, and you can see that the ART Regulation Rules 2010. The meetings actually started in 2007, when a gentleman from the ICMR suggested that IVF should be regulated in our country. We have been representing time and again to the government about this issue. That's a letter that we wrote from Foxy to the Prime Minister's office. I was invited for this also to the Rajya Sabha. That's me, Amit, and Sarita standing in front of the Rajya Sabha when we had gone to make a presentation to the Standing Committee on Public Health. And when we made this presentation, we were actually quite encouraged, because the way the committee responded to all the suggestions and even put them in that report. This report is available on the Parliament website. If you go and see it, you'll see that most of what we had suggested was included in the report. And this is part of what I had presented to the standing committee at that time. I'm going to first talk about the Surrogacy Act, and then I'll talk about the ART Act. The large part of the presentation will focus on the ART Act because that is what impacts most people or most gynecologists. We were kept on being told that surrogacy in India is a very big industry. All the time it was coming in the papers, surrogacy, surrogacy, surrogacy. In fact, it was estimated by various sources, so lucrative business of $2.3 billion, $400 million a year. That one is a multi-million-dollar industry. So what I did when I was preparing the presentation was, I looked at some reports. Remember, the data on IVF treatments in our country is very limited. So there was this report from Ernst & Young, and there was another report which was published by the ICMR. So I collated the data. I actually called up Ernst & Young, got the raw data from them, and then I made some back-of-the-envelope calculations. What was clear was that surrogacy cycles are around 1% of the total number of IVF cycles. And at that time, it was projected that India does something like 100,000 cycles a year. So if that's 1%, that's around 1,000 cycles of surrogacy every year. A pregnancy rate of 40% would result in 400 pregnancies per year from surrogacy. 400 pregnancies for a population of 1.2 billion people. A take-home baby rate of 32%, this would result in 320 babies being born every year out of around 40 million pregnancies which take place in India every year. And therefore, I raised this point to the committee that what are we talking about industry over here? Is surrogacy really an industry? You're talking about 320 births a year. And then I reworked the calculations. And when I reworked the calculations, I found that it was, of course, nowhere close to $1 billion. It was maybe 8 or 10 million or something. It is really fascinating to me how the narrative which surrounds IVF, elitist treatment, expensive treatment, available only to a few people, some parts of it may be true, but the fact is that India currently, according to me, has the most affordable IVF treatments in the private sector in the entire world. I'm not talking about countries where IVF treatment is nationalized, but for out-of-pocket expenditure, India has the cheapest IVF treatments in the entire world. We told them that there are pros and cons of surrogacy. We understand you're concerned about exploitative practices, etc. But if you're going to stop exploitation, shouldn't you better regulate it rather than simply banning it? So we said that what we would like is a single window or online registration. We would like a proper due process. We would like you to decriminalize what we are doing. And this experience came from our work in the PCPNDT Act. And we said you have to give compensation towards expenses for medically indicated surrogacy, because at that time they were talking about only altruistic surrogacy. And this was what we left them with. We wanted a well-meaning and balanced regulation, and we said, yes, we want a regulation. It's preferable to the current vacuum because we don't know what to do, what is right, what is not right. Adequate data collection, followed by a situational analysis, followed by a broader stakeholder meeting, and then follow that with a final consensus and draft. So this is what we left the standing committee, and the standing committee has put this in the report that this is what should be done. Of course, they didn't pay attention to us. In December 2022, both the Surrogacy Act and the ART Act were passed by the Parliament. They got assent from the President of India. And then they were notified on the same day on 25th January 2022. Not my idea of a good Christmas present. For the Surrogacy Act, I'm only going to show you one slide because this slide pretty much says it all. No surrogacy clinic, etc., or any person shall conduct, offer, undertake, promote, associate with, or avail of commercial surrogacy in any form. This one sentence bans commercial surrogacy in our country. To the extent that surrogacy is allowed, only altruistic surrogacy is allowed. In between, there was a bit of a ray of hope. There were some draft regulations which came out after this act came, where they said that surrogates can be compensated for their time. But when the final regulations came, even that was not there. And I doubt very much whether this is going to solve any problem of exploitation, etc. In fact, according to me, what this will do is create an underground market where friends and relatives will suddenly show up, get paid under the table, and be exploited even more than they were doing earlier. And we told them this. We told them, define how much to be paid, when to be paid. You write the contract. We will sign it. We'll get the surrogate and the commissioning couple to sign it at penalty or whatever of this thing, but no. So as of now in India, what exists is only altruistic surrogacy. Altruistic surrogacy to the extent that you cannot even compensate the surrogate for her time, her expenses, etc., etc. And therefore, I'm only going to show you this one slide of the Surrogacy Act, because to my mind at least, surrogacy in this country is now dead and buried. Unless something changes dramatically, I don't think we are going to do a lot of surrogacy in the future. So let me move on then to the ART Act. I was just thinking how to make this presentation, and then I thought that if I just talk about each section of the Act and explain it, it'll get very boring. Because that though you can read on your own from the website. So what I did was, I looked at the Act and the rules, and I said that these are the talking points I'll tell you about, practical, what you have to do to follow the Act. So we'll start with what is the Act about, the authorities, and go right down to punishments and offenses. So what is the Act about? Whenever you read any Act, you have to read the preamble. In fact, it is the preamble, as I said, which sets the tone and the tenor of the Act. The MTP Act, as I said, is an empowering Act. The PCPNDT Act and now the ART Act are both acts meant for regulation and supervision. And this is the key difference in the Act. It's not an act which is supposed to empower you to do ART. It is an act which is supposed to regulate and supervise you while you are doing ART. So it regulates and supervises, prevents misuse, and it also regulates and supervises research and development. Now, this is something which people have not been talking about. Because if all fertility research and development has to be regulated and supervised, what happens to all the papers, free papers, papers in journals, etc., that we do for infertility? Will we in the future see the infertility free papers in AICOG going down? Because at the end of the day, it is research in infertility, no? Whenever you do a study on clomiphene citrate or letrozole, it is also research in infertility. I think this is an implication which people have not thought through. What about the authorities? A lot of confusion about it, but it's actually quite simple. There are 4 authorities. There's the National Board, State Board, there's a registry, and then there's appropriate authority. The function of the National Board, in a sense, is to guide the development of the Act and modify and make suggestions to the government as things go along, and it is to supervise the functions. The State Board echoes the functions of the National Board at the state level. The registry, on the other hand, acts as a central database. And the purpose of the registry is twofold. One is to look at the data that is generated, and 2, make changes to the Act based on the data that is generated. And then for us, this is the important thing, which is the appropriate authority. Because this will be our point of contact with the authorities on the ground level. And these are the powers that have been given to the appropriate authorities. Now remember, the appropriate authorities here have a lot of power, but they are also bound by a code of conduct. Unfortunately, that code of conduct has not been made yet, but that is one of the functions of the national board. So we have to now advocate to make the code of conduct properly. So who needs to register? Now this is a very important question, and I keep on getting phone calls for this. If you are either preparing semen in your hospital or clinic, or even if you are performing an IUI, you don't have to be preparing the semen. I know a lot of people send their patients to a lab, get a prepared sample, and then you do the IUI in the lab. But if you are even doing an IUI, even if you are not preparing the semen, you have to register. Because it is defined as any manipulation of any gamete outside the body, which is IUI, you have to register. And I hope I'm very, very clear on that. So practically, I think everybody in this room will have to register, because all of us at least do IUI. Even if we don't prepare the sample in our clinic, even if you do a donor insemination, for example, with a sample from a sperm bank, you still have to register. If you are doing only ultrasound, if you are not doing any IUI whatsoever, no AIH also, then you don't have to register under ART Act. But you have to register under PCPNDT because you have an ultrasound machine. How do you register? According to the Act, you have to register via the appropriate authority. But because appropriate authorities have not been set up in every state, for now, you have to log on to that national ART portal and then fill in a form, and that form then has to be submitted to the appropriate authority. Now, something else which was very confusing, people said, "Arey, the authority is not there, do what you want." It was not like that. What the Act said was that within 60 days of establishment of national registry, you have to register. So the registry was established on 22/4/22, and the deadline for registration was 22/6/22. That means even if your state doesn't have an authority, you have to register. You register yourself online. Okay, it is not that you have to wait for the state board or the state authority to be formed. You had to have registered by 22/6/22. You register on the portal, then you wait for the state appropriate authority to be formed to pay the fees. There was also this, that we could, till 6 months after the Act was notified, do whatever we wanted. And that was a fallacy. You could not do whatever you wanted. You still had to follow the Act to whatever extent was possible. But even that period is now over. 6 months expired on 24/7/22. So now the Act is there in full force. We have, for example, completely stopped doing donor cycles, both embryo and egg donation. Because I will tell you what the criteria are for donor. You cannot fulfill them till the state board doesn't get formed. And so we have stopped. So how do you register? You apply on that portal. Now you have to wait to pay the fees. Because the state board and the state authority is not there, there's nobody to collect fees from you. So if you're doing just IUI, 50,000 rupees. If you're doing IVF, 2 lakhs. And if you're running a bank, then 50,000. This has been bought down. It used to be 5 lakhs. We spoke to the government several times, and we have now brought it down to 2 lakhs. It's still a lot, but it's lesser than what it was. You have to get a decision on registration in 30 days. The authorities can't take forever. If your application is rejected, you have to be given a reason in writing. And if you don't get this reason in writing within 37 days, then the authority in writing has to tell you why they have not processed your application. The registration is valid for 5 years, it's renewable for another 5 years, and after 10 years, you will have to reapply to get your clinic registered again. There's no denial or renewal without a hearing. And there's Form 1 for the ART clinic and Form 2 for the ART bank. Another source of confusion was what will happen to the current embryologists. Well, they'll remain. because the one-time exception has been made to ensure that all the embryologists who are currently working will be able to continue working. These are the requirements of clinics and banks. Now, the reason I put this slide up was that I work in a lot of IVF clinics, around 15, 16 of them, and everybody was telling me, oh, I'll have to put in a laminar flow, HVAC system and a laminar flow. I'll have to have a separate andro room, separate cryo room. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Act. It's not mentioned anywhere in the rules also. The rules and the Act only talk about a list of equipment. They don't talk about place. How many square feet you need, how many rooms you need, how many air conditioners you need, none of that is there. So there was a lot of worry about it because in informal discussions they used to tell us that you'll now have to have this, that and the other, but when the Act and the rules have come, it's not there anymore. So how will you manage your patients? You have to provide professional counseling. By professional counseling, it means you have to have a designated counselor. Now, the person who can become a counselor, that definition is broad enough for you to even make your assistant, who is a gynecologist or an MBBS doctor, can also be a counselor. But there has to be a designated counselor. You have to inform, let them arrive at a informed decision. And one of the things that you need to tell the couple is that the child which is born from that ART treatment has all the rights of a biological child. It has to be confidential. There are some exceptions for confidentiality, and your clinic should have a grievance cell. Who can undergo infertility treatment? Women above the age of 21 and below the age of 50. Men above the age of 21 and below the age of 55. You have to give a proper discharge certificate saying exactly what you have done, and you have to submit all your data to the National Registry. You can cryopreserve only after specific instructions about what to do in case the couple dies or something. The pre-implantation genetic testing is limited to pre-existing heritable or genetic diseases, and of course no sex determination is allowed. You are not allowed to transfer more than 3 oocytes or embryos. You are not allowed to mix gametes from more than 1 man or 1 woman. You're not allowed to mix semen from 2 individuals, and you can't use ovum derived from fetus. So far, so good. I mean, all these are things which we should be following anyway. So far, quite all right. The problem starts here. When it comes to donors, first of all, it says that oocytes donors will be provided for by the ART bank. Now there's no state board. Because there's no state board, there are no registered ART banks. Because there are no ART banks which are registered, you can't get donors. So in fact, if you're doing donor cycles, I would strongly urge you to stop, both semen as well as oocyte. The donors for males should be between 21 and 55, and for females between 23 and 35. For treatment, it was 50. For donors, it's 35. You, a single donor, cannot donate oocytes more than once, which is still fir bhi theek hai. But even sperm donors cannot donate more than 1 sample. Now, this is obviously written by someone who has absolutely no knowledge about IVF. They don't understand the science. They have just put some bureaucrat, and that bureaucrat has sat and written this. An oocyte donor, moreover, you cannot retrieve more than 7 oocytes from a donor. In fact, this has become a bit of a laughing stock, if you ask me. After this came out, on behalf of Foxy, I wrote to the government saying that, this kind of writing in a law, an important law, is going to make us the laughing stock of the world. I've been doing IVF for more than 2 decades, and even now, I don't know how to stimulate the patient so that I'll get exactly 7 oocytes. And when should I stop? Should I stop when I get 7 oocytes? Should I stop when I get 7 M2s? When should I stop doing the pickup? You know what reply I got back? If you stimulate a patient carefully, you'll be able to get 7 oocytes. Can you imagine? I mean, obviously, this is some bureaucrat who's sort of replying back. So, age of the donor has to be from ART bank, only once in lifetime, only 7 oocytes, An insurance policy has to be taken which will cover the health of the donor for a year. All that is fine, but one more troubling thing is the intending couple has to sign an affidavit in front of a magistrate saying that they will fulfill all these conditions for the donor, and privacy goes right out of the window over there. So this person is going to go to court, have her name called out in open court, saying that this person has to sign an affidavit because she's undergoing egg donation. So privacy is like rest in peace. So these are the screening tests that you have to do for your donor. And of course, you have to store for a period of not more than 10 years. You have already taken consent of what to do after 10 years. All sale, transfer, use for somebody else is prohibited, but you can sell, transfer, or use for the same person to another clinic. Of course, the biological child of the commissioning couple will be considered. The donor relinquishes all parental rights. Now, another point of confusion is, will ART banks have to do pickups and store oocytes, which will be provided to the clinics? Or will they only screen and verify donor details, and then the clinic will do the pickup and stimulation? Well, if you look at the Act and the rules, it seems clear to me that all non-clinical donor work for oocyte donors at least has to be done by the bank, and all clinical work has to be done by the clinic. Because see, screening of gamete donors, collection, screening, and storage of semen, which means for semen donors, everything the ART bank does, they work as a semen bank, and provision of oocyte donor. It doesn't say collection, screening, and storage of oocytes. Also, look at that responsibilities of ART bank. Again, screening and registration of oocyte donor. Nowhere does it say that they have to do the pickup and freeze the eggs. And look at the minimum equipment in banks: centrifuge, incubator, microscope, and laminar flow. No ICSI machine, no cryopreservation, no cryotanks, nothing. It obviously means that the bank will do the non-clinical work and the clinic will do the clinical work. The records have to be kept carefully for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, you have to transfer your records to the registry. I suppose when 9 years and 11 months go, they will give us the procedure of what to do when 10 years get over. So the rules have come out, and these are all the various consent forms. They are quite straightforward, and in fact, a welcome sort of a change, because we now have fairly uniform consent. I remember there were some clinics which used to take consents for IUI of 5 and 6 pages. So they used to include everything, infection and this and that and the other, vagal and this and that. So what we have done in our clinic is made a PDF like this. We put our clinic logo there, and we have made sort of a letterheads and so on of the consent forms. If anybody would like to take these, just let me know. I can WhatsApp the PDF to you. Offenses and penalties. If you look at the first part, are quite reasonable. It says that for sex determination, there's imprisonment and fine. And for anyone who creates problems from A to G, will have this punishment: first a fine of 5 lakhs, but may extend to 10 lakhs. So in the first instance, you're not going to be imprisoned. But if you repeat, then you will be imprisoned. And if you look at the offenses over there: abandon, disown, import or help, exploit the couple. Now that's a problem. What is exploit the commissioning couple? What's the definition of exploitation? Today, if I tell a couple that your cost will be 1 lakh rupees, tomorrow I have to charge 10,000 more because I had that expenditure, the couple can turn around and say, you exploited me for 10,000 rupees more. Yeah, I'll finish in a minute. So exploitation is a problem. And another problem is that copy-paste clause from the PCPNT Act, that whoever contravenes any provisions can be punished under this thing. In fact, after the act came, a flurry of papers started coming out from the Ministry of Health. In 10th February 1st, this RTI application came, some corrections came in April, then the appropriate authorities were notified in union territories with and without legislature. This is a notification from the government of Maharashtra, which appointed appropriate authorities. They appointed the same people who were looking after PCPNDT for ART. This is another notification which talked about how the national board will be established, and then how the state board will be established. And this is the current status. If you go on the website, you'll see those are the states where boards are formed. Those are the states where authorities are there. And in Maharashtra, that is the status. They have said this will be the board. Unfortunately, the chairman of the board is health minister, and I don't know whether you've been following the news in Maharashtra. We have a very turbulent time in our politics over there. We don't have a health minister. Right now, our entire cabinet is 2 people. And so therefore, we have a notification, but we don't have a board. And then, of course, this final sort of piece on the cake, the government said that these 17 states over here have not notified the state board. So specialists in this state continue doing what you're doing for another 3 months because there's no notification. They haven't taken account of the fact that even in the states where notification has happened, the boards are not functioning. They should have given this exemption to the whole country, but they have relied on the notification. So this is the current status. 2,678 applications. I accessed this yesterday in the afternoon. 2,678 applications for ART clinics, 636 banks, and 617 surrogacy clinics. I don't know what those 617 people are thinking. How will they do surrogacy? They have applied for it all right, but you're wasting 2 lakh rupees actually for registering in the current state. And obviously, nothing has been approved and nothing has been rejected. So this is my last slide. Complexity creates confusion, simplicity focus. And it's rather strange that the government, which came out with such an excellent law like the MTPs, also come out with such a confused law like the ART. I think probably what has happened here is that this law has been driven by perception and narratives rather than data. And we can only hope that as the National Registry evolves and more data comes out, the law will become better and more reasonable. Thank you very much.